Everyone come up. We'll get the panel to come up here with us and get seated. Good. This looks good. We filled out the ballroom well. All right. Is here, Peggy?
Thank you.
All right. So as the title again is Redefining Business as Usual. And we're going to talk about leadership particularly as it relates to that for about 50 minutes. We don't have time for questions, so we're going to keep a conversation going here for this 50 minutes with our three panelists who really bring stellar backgrounds in looking at these issues in their various companies. Let me introduce them. They have linked the bios in your book, but I want to focus on a couple things on each of their backgrounds so you can see how relevant that is to our conversation today. On my near left is Peggy Smith, CFO of National Grid, one of the largest utilities in America. Under her leadership, National Grid is driving the transition to clean energy future. They're developing financing models for new energy solutions like battery storage, solar energy, and the expansion of electric vehicle charging stations. She has a personal interest and passion in advancing sustainability accounting practices. She's even passed the FSA. If any of you haven't approached that, that is a tough test when someone says they have passed the FSA credential holder from SASB. She was formerly Vice President of Finance at Consolidated Edison in New York and CFO at Hamilton Sundstrand, a United Technologies company. She's also a board director, and you're going to see in all of our panelists here today, they've got combinations of leadership in their organizations and board leadership as well. In the middle there, Mark Hawkins. He is CFO and president of Salesforce. If you've looked out, if you're in an upper floor of this hotel and looked out your window, you certainly saw the Salesforce Tower, an imposing building here in our city. He is responsible for leading the company's global finance organization, a member of the company's executive committee reporting directly to the CEO. He has 30 years of experience leading finance organizations at global software and technology companies, including Autodesk, Logitech, Dell, and HP, obviously all major leaders in our technology sector. And he serves on the board of SecureWorks, a global leader in cybersecurity software, and Plex Systems, a leader in cloud-based ERP. And then on my far left, Rebecca Henderson. She is the John and Natty MacArthur University Professor at Harvard University. And she's also on the board of Amgen and IDEX. She is one of 24 university professors. That is the most elevated position you can have as a university professor at Harvard. She is a research fellow at the National Bureau of Economic Research, a fellow of both the British Academy and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences, and she is an expert on innovation and organizational change. Her research explores the degrees to which the private sector can play a major role in building a more sustainable economy. So we've got a pretty qualified group of people here to talk about this topic and the things we're going to confront here. Don mentioned the report that just came out, Change the Conversation. And if you'll bear with me, I just want to read you the 9 recommendations that came out of this report. I think it provides good context to this conversation and things all of us, if you don't have time to read the report, it's just I want you to hear these. It's things that we all should be reflecting on from to the Change the Conversation. And this has to do, again, with that evolving dialogue between boards and investors, what's being asked for, what's meaningful, and how we can get it right. The 3 strategies are formalize sustainable business integration. And there's 3 elements of that. Demonstrate accountability for sustainability, develop the sustainability business case, and cultivate collaboration between sustainability, investor relations, and governance teams. And we're going to talk about that, how the changing responsibilities are in businesses today for what we all have been working on. Strategy number 2, identify what to disclose and where to disclose it. Focus investor-directed disclosures on what's material, but don't ignore emerging trends. Disclose decision-useful information quantitatively and qualitatively. Disclose sustainability information consistently where investors are already looking. And then finally, strategy 3, implement a proactive investor engagement strategy. Use language that investors understand and value. Leverage the C-suite and the board of directors as key messengers, and diversify the engagement strategies. So that's some of the key asks, if you will, from the investor conversations that our series staff put together in this report. And again, very worthwhile report. And remember, concurrent with these issues is a significant uptick now in ESG investing. 1 out of every 4 new dollars invested in this recent years is going now into ESG-related products. But we also know that boards are somewhat haphazard in how they're talking about ESG and the relevance of sustainability in the boardroom. And then finally, we also know that those organizations that have taken this on and showed their demonstrated accountability are producing real results and real value for investors. So let's get the conversation started, if I will. And I'm going to start out talking really about the way that investors talk to companies, and particularly CFOs, and are no longer just asking for information and disclosures, but really trying to link that conversation to you on the decision-making in an organization and how that relates, how these business drivers create value for investors. So this is a more complicated conversation. Now we're talking about absolutely influencing financial performance. This isn't just about a broad plethora of information that might be of interest in various formats, but we want to know literally, has a business talked about that, thought about it, demonstrated it, measured that type of relationship and where we are in that continuum. So I'm going to start out with the CFOs, and then we're going to take a different angle and talk about it kind of from a board perspective as well. So Peggy, do you want to kick that off for me?
Sure. Well, prior to starting the session, first of all, I'm very happy to be here with all of you. We were talking amongst ourselves about the role of the CFO and the fact that CFO, I believe that the CFO has a responsibility and really an obligation to lead this conversation and to lead the activity on all things ESG within the company. And that's really because the CFO is at the heart of strategy, right? Working hand in hand with the CEO, that we are setting the tone and the direction for the company. But more recently, because the amount of change that's going on, we've also become, I'd say, the chief transformation officer in the company. And so, but it's really important, chief transformation officer, and it's our job as we're going through change to instill a financial mindset and a risk-intelligent culture within the company as we're going through those changes. And now we are one of the world's largest utilities and energy companies in the world, investor-owned. And so we are at the front lines, and Mindy said it before, on climate change, right? That is something that we're very passionate about. And so we're looking at that. We have 20 million customers in the Northeast, and we have millions more in the UK, and they're demanding not only reliable and safe power, but also affordable and, importantly, clean and green. And so that's cost us over the last 10 years or so. We've been transitioning our business model. We've been moving from, say, being a traditional utility and taking those basics and merging it with innovation and technology and customer choice. And we're trying to do that using experimentation and new technologies and the like, coming up with new options for our customers, but all key is using that financial mindset and focused on risk. And so over the last 10 years or so, we've been really doing a lot of change in our company. And it's important for us because we invest just in the US, we're investing over $3 billion a year just on our core infrastructure. And a lot of it now is going to green and clean technology. So just as an example, we were the first company to connect an offshore wind farm into the grid onshore off of Rhode Island. We had one of the largest smart grid projects in Worcester, Massachusetts. In upstate New York, we had one of the first neighborhood community solar projects in a low-income area that benefited people. And very soon, in the next month or so, we'll be announcing that we'll have a battery storage project in Nantucket, off the coast of Massachusetts. That will be the first time that we'll be using battery storage to help offset our transmission, if we have any issues in our transmission to the island. And so these are the things that we're doing as a company. And again, it's big dollars, over $3 billion a year, just on the infrastructure that's becoming clean. But that's where the CFO has to really step in and insert themselves. Right?
I assume when you talk about sustainability drivers, when you're in your own shop, not with investors present, do you describe them? How do you view those drivers? I mean, I think we've been all burdened with this language around us. I hear pre-financial, extra-financial, all kinds of ways of basically saying sustainability drivers sit outside the financial equation. How do you and your staff talk about these drivers?
You know, it's a part of the day-to-day business.
But you didn't leave business school thinking that, did you?
No, I certainly didn't. No.
So wait a minute. I want to picture, how did you get there from business school? Because that seems a stretch to me. The curriculum in business school doesn't support this thesis yet.
I'm personally passionate about combating climate change. And it's something that I have just inserted myself. Being the CFO, and we were talking about this before, you have a calling card to go anywhere in the company.
Yeah.
Use it.
Yeah.
Use it. And influence.
Yeah.
You know, I put myself, as we were redesigning our org structure, I put myself as the chair of the sanctioning committee for all of our capital projects.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I get to influence.
Yeah. Have you ever had I'll just keep going, but I want to stay with you for a second. Have you had a CEO where you've had to bring them along, or have you been blessed with on the same page as you?
I've been blessed with CEOs who we're totally aligned. And we're very fortunate, too, because we do operate in the Northeast. And just like California is very progressive on this front, so is Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island. So we've been very fortunate, too, because you can't do it by yourself.
Yep.
It takes a whole village, really.
Good. Before I get to Mark, one interesting data point I had this year was, if you haven't ever read the Edelman Public Relations Trust Barometer, it comes out every year and is released in Davos. It's a wonderful document to look at trust in business. And there's one question on that, basically, who is the trusted voice of a company? And of course, the CEO would like to think they're the most trusted voice. But year after year, that shows it's just not true. On the one hand, employees are often the trusted voice, and through their articulation of business goals and culture through social media, that's influential. But I noticed in this year's survey, it was the CFO that is the most trusted voice.
Makes sense to me.
It makes sense. Yeah, right. No self-interest there. But I think for all of us in our room, that we spend enough time thinking about this relationship to what we need to get going in our business relationship. So, Mark, now you. Give us your view. How does this work for you in terms of value performance?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think, first of all, again, it's a wonderful opportunity to see all of you. And really, the message that I think about for all of us today, before I get into that question, is really to activate. To activate and to go beyond conceptually understanding and internalizing the need to actually, I'll call it chunkify and break down a complex problem and start doing things. And that's what encourages me, because I see people doing that, and we'll come back and talk about that more. I believe that, in you think about a healthy society and a healthy environment, those two things underpin economies, a healthy society and a healthy environment. And today, we're faced in a situation where we really need to step up and think about how to reimagine our business models, all of us around the world, and to remix things in a way to improve so that we'll have a more healthy society and climate going forward. Our planet depends on it, but moreover, our businesses depend on it. And I think that, when you talk about, and I agree with Peggy that a CFO can go anywhere and weigh in, but where I want to weigh in is things where it really matters, where there's a real inflection point, a real amplifier to help. And in this case, our business as well as our community, which we have a very strong feeling on. And I think that, when you stand back and look at today, and I really relate to this, Jack, I think business is the greatest platform for change today, productive change that we can do. And the reason I say that, and the reason I, as a CFO, am so motivated and passionate about being involved in this, is that our employees care. Your employees care. I know that. Our shareholders care, and that pitch has been rising for 5 years. For anybody, I've been in the public markets for a long time. It's been rising in a big way, and it'll continue to rise. It's a mega trend that companies need to get in front of, for sure, to prosper in the long term. So the shareholders care, the employees care, our customers care. Our customers constantly ask us. Our community cares, we care, I care. And I think that when you see a situation like that where you have a multi-stakeholder environment, that's why we at Salesforce have done stuff like we've hired a chief equality officer years ago. That's why we took positions on equal pay for gender, very large and strong positions. That's why we believe everybody should be treated equally. That's why we took on the ethical use of technology and humane use of technology initiatives and hired some experts in that way. But that's also why we're bearing down and thinking about what we can do. How do we activate as a company, and why should we? Well, you said something, Jack. I firmly believe that your values and your culture drive value. Your values and your culture drive value for your long-term success as a company, and I believe that that's to be true. And I presented that to all of Wall Street on our last Investor Day. John Cummings is my head of investor relations, great guys here in the audience as well, also passionate. But we presented that, and it was really well received because you can begin to see how your values can impact your long-term success. And I think as a CFO, I want to declare my passion is short-term execution to a long-term plan.
Yeah.
Not short-term execution to a short-term plan. And that's a very, very different mindset. And if we're going to tackle serious problems and serious opportunities to create value and protect value for our shareholder and our stakeholders, we have to glance ahead further. So for me, it's the greatest platform for change. All of our stakeholders care about this. It has huge implications for our society, for our economy, and for our businesses, and we should weigh in. And we're doing all kinds of things in Salesforce. I talk about our employees want to do something. I just have to put this out. At Salesforce, we have about 37,000 people. We have over 8,000 people on our team all over the world that are donating their time to really help in the environment, and they're called Earth Force within Salesforce. And I'm so impressed, I'm so inspired by them because they break it down in terms of how do we run more operationally effectively within our company, but more importantly, Jack, how we also go into the community and give back to the community. That has been a key thing for our company since inception. We gave what was called the 1-1-1 rule, 1% of the market cap of our company. We gave away to a foundation when we created the company 20 years ago. We give 1% of 37,000 people's time every year. We pay them 7 days to go donate to 501(c) organizations, and we support 38,000 NGOs. It's our ethos to care about society, to care about the environment. We think it's good business in the long term. That's why I'm involved as a CFO, and I'm constantly getting interaction with the investor on that.
Super. Of course, Salesforce was named the #1 company in the world to work for, but you've worked at a number of technology companies. I have to assume there's a different story there in other companies, and you've been on a journey of getting to where your thinking is. Can you just do a little bit more of that? We don't have a contrarian CFO up here today.
Sure.
I'd just like to hear clearly that debate that's gone through in your career around that and how you've straddled that. And certainly you must hire people in the finance shop. I can't believe they walk in all thinking the way you've just presented this about finance.
Right.
How do you get people there?
Well, first of all, the first thing I would want to say is I actually embrace constructive skepticism. I think it's important. I think you don't shut down ideas when people want to pressure test things. Just to be clear, one of the ways that I get there when working with my team is if we're doing something around sustainability, I want to be clear, the rigor that we're going to attack that with is the same rigor I'm going to attack a new product introduction, a sales quota, anything that is critical to our success in our company. We absolutely go deep in trying to understand the math, the metrics, what's happening, and why does this make sense? Why does this justify or not justify? And so I don't want anybody to come in thinking somebody's got the great ideas market cornered. I don't believe that at all. I want to hear constructive, debate and thoughts. But I also think, Jack, that in every situation in life, there's being on the right side of history. and there's been on the wrong side history. And people overestimate what they can do in a year. They underestimate what they can do in a decade. Watch what's happening. I'm a big person of patterns. CFOs are paid to watch patterns. The pattern is impeccably clear that it's not only the temperature that's rising, the expectations are rising for companies to get in front of this. And so from my standpoint, I want somebody to see the same data I'm seeing and push on me. And so I come to it on a journey where I really believe that this is a topic that is one of the most important topics in our lifetime, and we're going to have to get in front of this. And companies that are successful will prosper. Every modern 21st century company has got to be thinking about it. Every board, if it matters to the shareholders, to a degree, not every single one.
Right.
If it matters to the employees, it matters to the customers, and it matters to the community, why wouldn't that not matter to the board?
Have you had CEOs in the past of other companies you've worked for that aren't there, and you've had that friction?
Yeah, I would give you a different thought. I would give you a thought that, keep in mind, I've been in technology for 38 years, and I've worked with some amazing people. But like every topic of a day, a topic becomes clear in its importance over time. This topic has become really clearly important over, I would say, the last 10 years.
Yeah.
I mean, the rising, and Peggy and I talked a little bit about this. I think it's, so I feel like, what did Mahatma Gandhi say, that the truth is as it's revealed to you today? This is revealed to us today, you guys. I mean, we know we have to go. And I think that we need to take reasonable, responsible actions, and we could all take 10 of them before we walk out of this room.
Rebecca, maybe you could do a couple things in this conversation with us. First, I'd love for you, as the university professor at Harvard, and as you see those things, I'd love for you to comment a little bit on the curriculum and education around finance and MBAs, and how do you see that changing, and do you think it's developing people earlier on in their careers, or how do we get this thinking earlier in people's business careers going? And then secondly, from your experience both being on boards and your research, at Counselors we have a large body of corporate governance principles that our staff follow for engagement and proxy voting, and clearly board competency around climate change, board diversity, all those drivers now we feel are absolutely critical to our engagement conversations. So can you give us the board side of this in terms of, are they doing what they should be doing? Where in the board should that conversation take place? And those things.
So where is business education going, and how do we think about boards in 2 minutes?
Well, you can take more than 2 minutes.
No problem.
No, take more than 2 minutes, but we
No problem. They're both great questions. And I'd like to say, too, that I'm very honored to be on this platform. I write and teach about the way in which purpose-driven, strategically savvy business leaders can change the world, and indeed must change the world. So to be on a platform with two actual strategically sophisticated, purpose-driven business leaders is very cool for someone like me. So thank you very much. Let me talk about education first and then boards. But I think there's a sort of underlying idea here that's really important. So on the educational front, I teach a course at Harvard, at the Harvard Business School, called Reimagining Capitalism, Business and the Big Problems. I began teaching it 8 years ago now to 28 students. And the course grew gradually, and the students were, I would describe them as curious and engaged. Now we have nearly 300 students, and they are completely passionate, and they want to fix it now. And that's nearly a third of the business school class. And they are just so excited about what's possible in this space, and simultaneously deeply cynical. And it's this mix between hope and cynicism that I think is the challenge of our time. And as I think about boards, I think there's a similar challenge. So let me, if I could, connect it to my long-time research agenda.
Yes.
I spent 20 years at MIT as the Eastman Kodak Professor of Management. That was actually a coincidence, but an ironic one, since it's what I did. I worked with very large organizations trying to change in the face of oncoming threats. So it was for that reason that in 2002, I was in northern Finland, spending several months working with Nokia, trying to persuade them that Apple was a clear and pleasant and present danger. And at the time, Apple was selling 1 million cell phones a week. They were a third of the Finnish stock exchange. They had the most beautiful corporate headquarters, even more beautiful than the Salesforce Tower. All Scandinavian glass, and I was just gorgeous. And I was trying to persuade them to take Apple seriously. And I think often of that moment in Finland and this moment now. Because the business case for change was really pretty clear. I don't give myself any undue prescience. I said, put your operating system, put Symbian into the public domain, make it the Android of today, give it away, build the ecosystem, you will crush them. And they looked at me. I remember meeting with the chief operating officer and the chief strategy officer, and they said, Professor Henderson, we think you're probably right, but. And I think that's what's going on now, is, sometimes people say to me, well, Rebecca, if the business case for doing the right thing is so compelling, and you've both said, I'm the CFO, it's a business case, why isn't everyone doing it? Why isn't every board on the planet? Right. Why isn't every MBA course teaching it, all the way down the line? What's wrong? And what I think I know is these kinds of changes are hard. Yeah. And we are talking about a profound shift in the nature of capitalism. Yes. We're moving from a time in which we could take for granted that someone else would take care of the environment, and let me just say, someone else would take care of the social problems, education and health, and we didn't need to worry about the government, and somebody else would do all of that. And we're now seeing that that set of assumptions is no longer correct. And really internalizing that and reacting. So everybody's first reaction is, it's not happening. So that's what we're seeing, right? Climate change, it's not happening. The social problems, they're not happening. We can deal with this. That's always the first response. It's not happening. Second response, and this is my research agenda. I've done this for 30 years. Second response, we won't make any money. Well, so then people patiently explain that, yes, there's a business case, and excuse me, are you not going to focus on your workforce, and you're not going to take into account a massive risk that's going to shake the whole economy? I mean, what is that? Yeah. So we sort of fight our way to the business case. And then we hit the third and most difficult barrier. I'm really busy. I wasn't trained in this. We're not set up to respond. Do we really have to do it this year? And I'm hearing that uneasy laughter, right? You know exactly what I'm talking about, right? And I think that's sort of roughly where we are. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so if we think of this as, like a discontinuity, we have a few pioneers making that transition. Yeah. And that's why leaders like you two are so important. And this is why you're so important, the people in the room, because you're demonstrating that, yes, it's happening, and yes, there's a business case, and yes, it can be done. And everything we think we know about change is that that's how change happens. So let's go back to education and boards. So in education, we go from, well, Rebecca, you're really smart, but you're kind of out there, to, okay, you have 300 people in the Reimagining Capitalism class. They say it's a little bit of boasting, the best class they're taking. It's the most important thing that's being taught at the Harvard Business School. And so next year, I will be taking over the required course on leadership and ethics, because the dean thinks this is absolutely central. And I will be working with the course head of every other required course. And it's already in. I mean, my colleagues are smart. We're already teaching this in production. We're already teaching it in marketing. The people in leadership are all over it. But we'll put that together and put a bow around it. And that's happening at every business school. I don't want to say that Harvard is at the leading edge. I mean, we're a good school. Every major business school is moving in this direction, but it's kind of hard. And I think that's what's happening with boards, too. It's a new way of thinking. It's a new set of questions. It's a new set of routines. So it's definitely happening, but it's going to take a little while to work it through.
On the board side, does it come from just one or two people that have that passion and push that conversation, or does it come from a more embedded process, kind of risk management effort or board, or what causes the conversation to get spread and not an elective conversation in the board, or that last agenda item that we need to do quickly, and it is, how does it become part of that underlying financial discussion?
So I'm seeing three pathways. There are the firms for whom this is a clear and present issue. So the big energy companies, the big food companies, the big consumer goods companies.
Okay.
This is so obviously a central strategic issue that the boards are there. This mostly. The second pathway is the risk pathway. And I think this is one of the fundamental purposes of a board, is to step back and say, what are the long-term risks that really are likely to change our business model, change our stakeholders, how do we think about that? And in those boards, you're really seeing it come in through the risk management processes. Nearly every major board has, and I'm sure there are many people in this room who have experienced it, have really rethought their approach to risk over the last few years. And this is a natural question to ask in that context. And so I think that's another way it's coming in. And the third, and I don't want to knock the third, I mean, I was struck by Dawn's opening when she said, let's not forget why we're all here. And I think we're at this interesting moment where we're all almost schizophrenic. One part of us is an accomplished, deeply grounded professional, and the other part of us is, oh my goodness, we're about to burn the planet. What the heck are we going to do? You know, look at the inequality. This is not okay. Look at the political systems. What are we going to do? And so people are discovering purpose and finding the courage to bring that into the workplace in appropriate and useful ways. And I think that's the third pathway. I know some boards where the CEOs and the board are just like, this is the right thing, and we have to do it, and we are moving.
So if the conversation's going on in the boardroom, at least that's a promising comments you made, especially in some industry sectors, it doesn't appear that those understandings are being communicated outside the boardroom through to investors or to all the various information channels companies have. You know, the statistics, the metrics around disclosure, who's disclosing, quality of disclosure, all those would give a rather skeptical interpretation of that board conversation. So is it the boards having this great conversation in the boardroom and then they shut the doors and it's over? Or what happens there? What gets lost?
I have some thoughts. I'd be really curious what
I'll ask everyone
partners
here
on the
this
panel.
question.
Okay, so let me answer.
There's something wrong here in this conversation.
Let me answer very briefly. So two
Okay.
things. First, remember, we're in the midst of a major transition.
Yeah.
I'm giving you what's happening at the leading edge companies. That's what, you pick a number, 15, 20%? I mean, there's a lot of people. Let's see, it's not happening, we won't make any money, and I'm really busy. So that's still really happening. I think the other thing that's going on, and here I'd be very curious what Peggy and Mark think. What is the role of the board? You show up 5 times a year, you try and ask sensible questions, but your fundamental role is to ask questions and make sure that the CEO is not going off the tracks. You're not running the company. Management is running the company. That's really important. And when a board starts to get too involved in the nitty-gritty, that's not a good thing. And so I think it's difficult for all kinds of reasons to have the board get out in front of the company. It's not even clear to me it's appropriate. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there's a dance here between companies moving and boards moving. Boards can raise the questions, but I'm sure every board member in this room has had this experience. You raise the question. I know of one board that shall remain nameless, where someone I know said, well, what about this? And the CEO looked at them and said, that's a very interesting point. And you move along, and you move along. I think we're at a moment of transition.
Can I ask you, Peggy, do you want, Mark?
I would say we have a room full of investors. Go to the companies that you're working with and thinking of investing in. Ask to meet with the board. We are getting increasing number of requests like that, where it might be on a broad number of issues, but increasingly just on climate change alone. Climate change alone. Also, with the TCFD disclosures, take a look at those. You're going to learn a lot about how well the board is managing the risk and how well the company is managing the risk of climate change and other ESG issues, just from that alone. So I would encourage you all to take action, and people will listen.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, and I totally agree with Peggy's point. I was struck by how much I resonated with what Rebecca said on your organizational change management, people management change, and all the cycles that you were watching. There was one that I kind of was yearning to hear at the very end. And I told you I'm a big fan of looking at patterns and trying to understand things, but when I think about the history of complicated problems in the world, when you finally get to a point where you go through all the chapters that you're talking about, and then everybody scratches their head and they say, now how do I solve it? There gets to be a point where you get to the point where you really do conceptually understand it and you accept it, and you're busy and it's going to cost money, but then what? And I actually think that you can see so many other complicated problems in the world today where people are at the same point. And I can think of people in our chair where we deal with that, where somebody says, okay, what do? You pick the topic. Yeah. What do we do next? And I think where we're at today is to help people break it down in the history of complex problems. And it gets back to what the investors expect and what the board expects, requires experimentation. It requires a deeper and deeper deep dive into what possibly could solve this thing, and you start to measure it, and you can actually describe and measure the problem. And one of the things that people are doing a real solid for our community, people like SASB, people like TCFD, people like the folks in this very room, are raising the ability to begin to unify and how we can even describe the problem, let alone measure and manage it. So I think that's one of the reasons I think, Jack, that there hasn't been such a uniform, like, we're there. Everybody's there, because there's still, as history shows, when you're in the middle of solving a complex problem, you're going through this process. It's not just digital in that way. It's we didn't understand, we now can understand. We couldn't describe it, we can now describe it. We couldn't measure it, we can now measure it. It's a graduation and an evolution that needs to accelerate in our case. But I do think we can do that, and I do think we need to move beyond all the stages that Rebecca called out and begin to break it down into today's activities. I think it's activation time.
Let me ask you, the two of you, a kind of a tough question around the accuracy of the information that investors rely on here and the disclosure itself. I'm sure you've seen the studies that show that when an investor takes various ESG ratings of a company, they're often non-correlational. They do not seem to be measuring these schemes the same thing, and so telling us that we're still not there getting the right metrics, the right nature of disclosure. So, I think the CFO community, at least from an investor standpoint, has been viewed as a reluctant body that would embrace mandatory disclosure or disclosure through regulatory filings. And that's why we've ended up with softer, for lack of a better word, softer forums for the dissemination of your information that often lacks assurance at all. It's self-affirmation of ESG. Yet we claim this data has the same relevance as financial information, yet somehow we allow information to have no assurance to it. So tell me, that's my take, obviously. Yeah. So I'd like to hear the response. Should we have mandatory reporting? Should it be through a regulatory body? How do we get it right so that we can trust the information, have comparable information, and use it well as investors?
Well, I would encourage, right now I'm not in favor of mandatory, because I think it will come eventually, but again, calling to investors. Investors, if they're asking for the information, we're going to be providing it. And we are providing a lot of extra and new disclosures that we hadn't provided, say, 5 years ago on this front. So I think that it will evolve, and eventually it will become mandatory, but it's not going to be mandatory right now. And it's to this group that can influence it. It's groups like SASB, and like I'm on the board of Etsy, and if you look at Etsy's 10K for 2018, implemented all the SASB disclosures for consumer products company. I mean, look at that. It's really transparent, and that's voluntary. And eventually people too will say, you know what, maybe I should start doing that too.
But is the reason why it's not in the 10K because investors haven't asked for it, or you don't think, I'm saying you in the big CFO community, you do not think it's material to be in there? Mark?
Two things. I'll address that specifically. One, thing that I do think, and I agree with Peggy. I think the market is the greatest force for change.
Okay.
I really believe that. But part of the market is how do you hire the best people in the world and retain them in a world where you need to retain the best people in the world. People today care. Our employees deeply care about this. So that is part of the market. Our customers is part of the market. The shareholder is part of the market. There's no question in my mind. And when I'm struck about, two things. One is we're trying to raise the game at Salesforce. For example, we actually hired Ernst & Young to evaluate, our stakeholder report that we put out, impact report. We said we're going to innovate. We're going to try to do Ernst & Young just to raise that rigor in that way. But here's where I resonate, back to watching and not being tone deaf in a megatrend that's going to be important to the success of your organization, let alone to our environment and our well-being in our society. I was, with Larry Fink 4 days after he wrote the famous letter to all of his investors, or all the people they invest in. That's the biggest money manager in the world. I hosted him at Davos. We talked about that with an exclusive group of CFOs at the World Economic Forum. 4 days after that hit the press. When the biggest money manager in the world, the biggest holder of assets in the world, is telling you this is important, it's not hard to trend that where it was a lighter signal, and that signal is getting amplified. He has 6.2 trillion with a T under assets. Take State Street, wrote a similar letter, 3.6 trillion under assets. Their expectations are clear. We can go down the path of everything that Rebecca described to us, and our humanness, I guess, is what you're really describing. But the reality is equally, these are real math numbers, these are real people. And I just don't want to be 5 years late to the party in a world where I have to compete for the best people in the world, the best customers in the world, and to be a company that's going to really protect and create value for our stakeholders for the long term. Mm-hmm. And so in the 10K, we have put things in the 10K. We have put things in our proxy, in our 10Q, and we're continuing to evolve that. But again, we're learning. We are learning from you here today.
We're just about out of time. Rebecca, I was hoping you might just answer the closer question that Dawn set up for us, because it's on change management. And that is, who do you see as the change champions here going in the future? Who are the key people we need to focus on and think about that can really redefine business as usual?
I think employees and millennials are incredibly important. I was working with one CEO, and he said to me, Rebecca, I've always thought the sustainability stuff is bullshit, but my employees insist that I take it seriously. But if I have to pick one change agent that can really change the world, I think it's the asset owners, possibly in combination with the asset managers, but I think it's the asset owners. Because something we haven't talked about is many of the problems that we face are classic externalities. Mm-hmm. Yes, we can build a business case about improving our energy efficiency or treating our own employees better, but we have a whole system to fix. And the only people who have a strong economic interest in fixing the whole system are the big asset owners. So I just finished writing a case on the Japanese government pension fund.
GPIF, yeah.
And Hiro Mizuno. And he says, my responsibility is 30 years out into the entire population of Japan. And so for me, global warming is not some externality. It really affects the health of the entire community. And for me, bringing social inclusion to Japan is not some would-be nice. It's absolutely fundamental to improving the performance of the Japanese economy. And he would say that at the world level. So in my dreams, there's a room of 50 people, and between them they control 65, 70% of the world's assets. In some ways it's a little scary that room exists. But on the other, it is a little scary that room exists. But on the other hand, if they can look at each other and say, okay, let's make these issues pre-competitive. No one uses fossil fuels. Everyone pays a living wage. No one mucks with the political system in the really destructive ways. That would be absolutely world-changing.
Wonderful. All right. We're at
Thank
the
you.
end.
Thank you.
Well, unfortunately, I got through like a third of my questions. So you guys were so good, but appreciate that very much. And you know, at Counselors, we've got 1 million members, teachers, that are our pensioners. And this is the #1 issue I hear about. Every board meeting we have at Counselors, we now have a contingent of teachers in that boardroom challenging the board, challenging me on what we're doing and are we doing it fast enough. So I want you to make sure you hear that. So let me introduce our next speaker. We're doing a World Series talk, and our speaker is very inspirational, is Fawn Sharp. She's the president of the Quinault Indian Nation, and she's on the leadership circle for the We Are Still Coalition. So I'll move that over to you. All right. Thanks, everyone. Thank you very much.